What does constitute Canadian work experience for Express Entry immigration? Before I answer this question, please subscribe to our channel and enable notifications. For those of you who are following immigration to Canada, you probably know that Express Entry system is the most popular system of immigration to Canada. This is an online system that was introduced by the Government of Canada in 2015, and it covers three methods of immigration to Canada, namely Federal Skilled Worker Class, Canadian Experience Class, and Federal Skilled Trades Class. The most popular among the three is Canadian Experience Class, despite the fact that Federal Skilled Worker Class is an older immigration option. With a Canadian Experience Class, it is mandatory for you to show that you have Canadian experience. However, even if you're applying under Federal Skilled Worker Class or Federal Skilled Trades Class, if you show Canadian experience, you will receive points towards your CRS score, and that will help you to receive an invitation to apply and eventually immigrate to Canada. So let's focus on Canadian work experience and see what is acceptable as Canadian work experience, how you can claim it. So the first thing first is that what constitutes valid work experience in Canada? A valid work experience in Canada needs to be a work experience under National Occupational Classification or NOC code 0, A, or B. 0 means managerial positions. NOC A jobs are usually the jobs that you need a university degree to do them. And NOC B jobs are the jobs that you usually need to go to college and have a post-secondary diploma or something similar to that to do the job. If you are not familiar with the concept of National Occupational Classification or NOC, I have an article. I post the link up here. You can read that article. On top of the nature of the work that you do, your job needs to be done for at least 1 full year in Canada. So for each 1 full year of work experience, you receive points. 1 year of work experience, it means that you have worked at least 30 hours per week. What if you didn't work full-time and you worked part-time? In those situations, under Section 73 of the regulations, it allows you to calculate based on comparison with the full-time work. For example, if you have worked 15 hours a week, then it means that every 2 weeks that you worked is equal to 1 week of full-time work. In other words, if you worked 15 hours a week, then you need to work 2 years in Canada to consider that as 1 year of full-time work experience. Of course, if you have less than 1 full year of work experience, unfortunately, you won't receive any points. If you go beyond that, not only it qualifies you for Canadian Experience Class, it also increases the number of points that you receive towards your CRS score. The maximum points that you could receive is when you have 6 years or more of work experience in the past 10 years. It's not just about the number of years, it also is the duration that your work falls into. To qualify under Canadian Experience Class, you need to show that you worked at least 1 year in the past 3 years. So when you submit your application, go back 3 years, and if you can show 1 year of full-time work experience or equivalent to 1 year of full-time work experience, then you may consider it. If you fall short, unfortunately, you cannot claim entering Canadian Experience Class. However, you may receive CRS score. And the maximum duration that you could consider is 10 years. So between 3 years and 10 years, you still can receive CRS score, but that doesn't qualify you for Canadian Experience Class. In other words, it's very important that you have some recency in your work experience in Canada, but beyond that recency, you could still receive CRS score. On top of the duration, it's important that while you were working in Canada, you had valid status. So for example, you had a valid work permit and you were allowed to work in Canada. We talked about what is valid work experience. Let's talk about what is invalid work experience. In other words, you cannot claim these kinds of work experiences. The first one is the very fact that if your job was a NOC C or a NOC D job, unfortunately you cannot claim it. The other obvious one is that the work was outside Canada. If you didn't have status while you were working, it is not acceptable. If you were a refugee claimant while you were working, the work experience is not acceptable and it's invalid. Another example is that if you were a full-time international student, then your work experience while studying is not acceptable, even if the work experience is a co-op work. Sometimes when you receive a work permit, there are some limitations on that work permit. So just having a work permit doesn't qualify your work experience. You need to respect the limitations on your work permit. For example, if your work permit says that you are not allowed to work for adult industry, then working for adult industry doesn't qualify as Canadian work experience. If your work permit says you need to work for employer A, you cannot work for employer B. If your work permit limits you to a specific NOC code, then you cannot work for the same employer for another NOC code or another employer for another NOC code. You need to make sure that your work experience was aligned with the permissions that you had to work in Canada. If your work experience in Canada is as a self-employed person, you cannot claim that as Canadian work experience. One question that some people may ask, what if I was allowed to work in Canada without a work permit? Does that qualify towards Canadian work experience? It depends on the situation, so you need to look into section 186 of the regulations, which explains who may work in Canada without a work permit. If you were actually working in Canada without a work permit, but you were allowed to work without a work permit, and assuming that you meet all the other requirements of Canadian work experience, then you may count that. Now let's say you have a Canadian work experience. How can you prove that to the immigration authorities? The minimum documents they expect from you is a contract with your employer and also a reference letter from your employer that clearly says your job duties, the salary that you received, the number of hours per week that you worked, and the duration of your work. On top of that, I highly recommend that you include one more document. And because your work is in Canada, that supporting document could be your T4 slip, it could be your notice of assessment, it could be a reference letter from a colleague, it could be the business card of yourself or the business card of your manager, or it could be your pay stubs or earning statements. One more or even more than one more document could really help you to convince the immigration officer that you were actually working for that Canadian employer, for how long you were working and how you were being compensated. Obviously, if your work was not being compensated, then it is not considered work experience. If you do not have a contract or if you do not have a reference letter from your employer, then you could be in trouble. An alternative is a statutory declaration that explains why you are not in possession of those documents. And also you need to include many more documents to verify your work experience in Canada. However, it is at the discretion of the immigration officer whether to buy into what you're saying or not. Thank you very much for watching this video. My name is Parsai. I'm a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. I teach immigration consulting at Ashton College. I'm the author of 88 Tips on Immigration to Canada. You can find out about your purchasing options by visiting 88tips.ca. Please subscribe to our channel, enable notifications, share this video with your friends, and like our videos. See you soon.